Um, and then I know that Nick had something he wanted to talk about with the Arizona lawsuit. I did read something about that earlier today.
Yeah, that was basically the judge threw out the case, and there's some weird things that was said about the actual case that really kind of troubled me. And I'm glad you're on because now you can help me kind of decipher what I'm going to interpret it means. So one of the county and the Secretary of State, their first comment, their first I guess argument would have been that the case was neither timely nor well prepared. So they wanted to get it dismissed on those grounds, but I guess the judge took it under advisement and he let it move forward for the evidentiary hearing. Does that sound right?
Yeah, so for what I read, because I'm gonna be honest with everyone, I have not been like glued to these different lawsuits or whatever, right? Because there's still a lot of other stuff going on. But I think what you said is right. And from what I read earlier, it was that the lawsuit, the threshold for proving fraud, right? Because fraud is the allegation. Not
Yes.
so much that the like the judge concedes, right? That it probably was bad practice to have so few polling sites, that there were all these issues, but ultimately, he's like, okay, this is something you should have raised before Election Day. Um,
Here's my argument on that. They don't release, the fact that they're going to close down 60 or so or reduce the amount of polling places by 70% weeks in advance where you actually have time to actually file suit and get a redress before the actual election occurs. So that's almost a moot point. That's really, really strange. And then on top of that, in order for you to prove election fraud, you have to somehow not only be able to prove the fraud, I mean, you have to prove the fraud not only occurred, but it actually would have changed the outcome of the election. So our system, as it stands right now, there's no real paper trail. There's no there's no verification process. So how can such a thing even be attempted to be done? Like if the burden of proof is all on you, they can be as fraudulent as they want to, and there's no burden on them to have to prove that they did anything wrong. I mean, to have to prove they didn't do anything wrong, right? And I
mhm.
guess as a plaintiff, the burden of proof is on you, but without a verification process or nothing can really come out in discovery that's really going to help you to make your case if there's no real paper trail, right?
Well, yeah, and I think part of the problem too is that they were saying like 100,000. I think the number was like there was a statistician or a mathematician that had some modeling and figures that that they were trying to get admitted, and I think the judge ruled out because there were certain errors that couldn't be accounted for, and then ultimately the burden was on the lawyer that bringing the suit to prove that 100,000 people had actually been disenfranchised. They hadn't met that high burden, but to the point about it's a moot point. The problem is that when the judge, right, when you go before a judge, like a judge in some cases can decide, okay, I'm gonna consider these other arguments whether you bring them up or not. But for the most part, if you're arguing from a brief or a petition or whatever, and you allege these specific things, that's what the judge is going to go on. So, had what you said, I don't know because I didn't. I'm not going to say I read the pleadings. I'm not going to pretend like I read the pleadings or anything because I did not. But from like what you were saying about how you don't really know ahead of time about the polling sites and things of that nature, while that's true, you still do know like a couple of days in advance, which is like how we saw in New York where they had tried to get the emergency hearing and stuff. Okay, so these are not perfect remedies, but the problem is, like I think in these cases with these judges and stuff, they look at, okay, well, you did have an opportunity. Well, that opportunity was only like a window of 12 hours. Well, you still had an opportunity. Like, I agree that's very harsh, and it does not necessarily take into consideration the egregious errors. And like you're saying, like how it's not like for months and months and months where the polling sites are going to be at. I mean, you don't even know. But I think that there's probably room to argue that they had reason to believe because of issues that they had in 2000. Like in Nevada, for example, there were articles like a week out at least about the different issues that they would talk about. Um,
Yeah, but remember
so
they didn't actually release anything saying they were going
no,
to
no, no,
reduce the
that's what, no,
polling
no, I
places.
agree. No, no, I agree, and that's what I'm saying. Like, in terms of argument from the legal standpoint, right? When you're going based on the arguments, it's possible that like I said, I have not read the pleadings, so I don't know what the specifics that were alleged. But at the same time, if you're not arguing those specific things that you're arguing, the judge is not going to, unless the judge wants to look favorably. Now, again, they can take this up. This is an appealable decision, so the Court of Appeals could be the next step in that process. So we'll see what happens. In the New York, with the New York case, it seems like they are committing, from last I saw, I may have misread this because I misread a couple things today, but it seems like they are willing to count all the provisional ballots, the ballot provisional ballots. Now, not saying that that actually changes anything, but not saying that will change anything, but it could potentially dent the lead, considering the volume of affidavit ballots that were filed throughout the 5 boroughs at issue. I know there's a push also, I believe last I saw in Erie County where Buffalo sits, to push for the absentee ballots not absentee ballots, affidavit ballots, because they're called affidavit ballots in New York, to be counted as well. So we'll see. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and another argument that the judge made was that, another argument put forth, I believe, by the counties, and I think the judge took it under advisement as well, was that election law may not actually apply to presidential preference primaries. And my biggest argument with that is, well, who pays for these primaries? If the taxpayers are paying for those primaries, and I think it should be subject to typical election law. So I think that was a strange argument that was also kind of floating out there. But the bottom line is, from this case, the conclusions I want to draw from this are, with our system being the way it is, there is no legal redress that's really even practical or practically possible for election fraud under our current system. Like, the burden of proof is all on you, and there's no way to prove anything with the way the system is constructed, with no verification methods or anything of that nature. So basically, as it stands right now, there actually could be fraud, and there's no way to prove or disprove. But since you're the plaintiff, you have to prove, and they don't have to disprove. So it's really tilted against you in that respect. And I'm saying, moving forward, what this should show us is that we really need to focus first and foremost on changing the way our voting process is done. In multiple countries, they don't have electronic voting machines due to the fact that they found that they are really easy to affect or change the actual vote. So they're actually outlawed in many countries around the world. Only in the United States do we have such a large amount of electronic voting being like our mainstay of voting. So I just want to bring that to everybody's record. I'm not saying there was 100% sure fraud or anything of that nature. I'm just saying, without some kind of verification process and a legal recourse in the event that fraud is likely, that there really is nothing you can really do to contest elections based on this case.
Well, this case doesn't really work that way, right? Because this case is an Arizona state case, right? And the decision this is based on whatever the pleading was, whatever was argued by that particular attorney in that particular case with those particular set of facts, right? All this stuff is very fact specific. And it's true, the burden is on the group bringing the suit, but that's whenever you sue someone, that's what it is.
Yeah,
there are affirmative defenses in some cases and stuff like that. In this case, the burden is on you to prove that the state, the entity did something, fraudulent of this high threshold. I mean, if the threshold was lower, then we could be throwing out, cases, left and right. But I do think that when we look at this versus the way the New York case happened, the New York case, there were not quite the same issues, but similar issues happening in New York. And they, election justice, they try to get out ahead of it, a few days in advance, right? They didn't know specifically what the issues were going to be, but they knew that there was one issue to specifically focus on, and they tried to deal with that.